Welcome back to the DCU Classics Director's Commentary with me, Scott, Toy Guru Neitlich, the brand manager for a good chunk of Mattel's line. Today, we are talking about fans' choice contests. And this is obviously not something that was invented by Mattel or invented by the DCU Classics brand. Star Wars has done their fair share of fans' choice figures over the years, and so have Marvel Legends, and so have a ton of other figure lines. Fans' Choice is really just a great way to involve the toy collecting community and help get their input into, what figures to do next. It's honestly a win-win situation. The fans get to participate in the toy-making process. The toy companies get to find out what figures collectors and kids want the most. And if all goes to plan, everyone gets a really awesome figure, one that they really wanted, one that sells well, one that complements a collection that might not maybe otherwise have come out for one reason or another. And in an ideal world, it's easy to make. This doesn't always happen. Case in point, the Fans' Choice figure number 3 for Star Wars, Catman Mon, who won, and I will absolutely quote what the Hasbro rep said: it broke the bank. This figure was just huge, and releasing it as a basic figure was a little tooling intensive. But hey, it happened. Well, we were aware of this, and the idea was to both listen to fans, get their input on who would be great figures in the DCU Classic 6-inch line, but also be conscious of the costs and make sure that the characters we selected weren't going to sort of pull an Catman Mon and break the bank, and we would be able to deliver that figure within the cost structure of any other basic DCU Classics figure. And we were very fortunate not just to have fan input, but to have our partners at Warner Brothers Consumer Products, who, they were just beyond fantastic. They were so supportive of what we were doing, and when you work with a partner like Warner Brothers Consumer Product, you're working with their baby, their IP, what's called intellectual property. And they are the experts. They know what toys work. They know how to translate their product into toys. The toy company really has the property on loan, if you will, from the IP holder. But we had worked up a lot of trust over the last few years with Warner Brothers, and we were really close with them. And they felt when we had a Fans' Choice contest concept, it was a go. It was a green light. They thought that was a great idea. We definitely worked with them on who would be the right choices for going into the poll. And after getting their approval on the character lineup, the next stop was working with our other great partners, the Four Horsemen. We just had so many great partners. I think that's why this line did so well. It was so many people from so many sectors of the toy industry, all working with passion and love to make the best possible product. And what the Horsemen were able to do was help visualize what the characters were going to look like. So these are the inked sketches. That's Vixen there, the first figure, and Starman, the next one. The Horsemen drew all of these as kind of a preview of what the figures would look like so that we could help sort of get Mattel Engineering and Warner Brothers aligned on the amount of new parts, the look of the character, because if the fans were going to vote, we wanted to make sure we knew which version they were voting on, both from a look standpoint and a tooling standpoint. The Horsemen actually did 2 different versions of Huntress here. The third candidate, they did kind of a modern one and a classic one. And Warner Brothers was great. They said, whichever one you think the fans would like the most. We wanted to sort of hedge our bets with the one that maybe showed a little less skin, but they were great. They knew she was a sexy character. It should be done right. And then Rad Man, a character that eventually we actually wound up realizing was going to cost a lot, but he didn't win the Fans' Choice poll, so we didn't have to cross that bridge due to all of his deco. Catman, a figure that amazingly looked almost exactly like the release we did do, because, again, this was the Horseman sketch. They drew this as a proof of concept. And as most people know, The Question won the contest in the end. He came out in Wave 11 at the end of the day. But the reason that I'm doing the video now is because this was the time in the line between Wave 6 and Wave 7. I just did the Wave 6 video of when the logistics for running the contest were done. Because with the way the toy industry, there is often almost a 2-year gap between words on paper that say you're going to do a figure and releasing that figure in stores, which meant if we were going to have a figure as part of this wave, wave 11, we had to start planning it between waves 6 and 7. And that's what we did. And for those who ask why the question won the contest, and not just because I personally like the question, it was definitely up to the fans, and in fact, ToyFare magazine did the voting, so we had no part in that. Well, he was really popular at the time, especially because of his appearances in the JLU Bruce Timm animated series. In fact, if you listen to the director's commentary on the DVDs, not my director's commentary on YouTube, that is, Bruce Timm mentions that once they started doing episodes about the question, he said something like, we just thought, the whole show should be about the question. He was fantastic. And that always made me smile, because his episodes were great. But he was a little tied up with red tape. There were some legal restrictions on doing the question, not in the show, but as a toy. And a lot of collectors may recall he was a difficult figure for us to get into the JLU line. Essentially, all of the Charleston characters who DC acquired in the 1960s were, honestly, I don't know all of the legal back and forth, but I just know they sort of fell into a different bucket, and we didn't have access to them, even in the JLU line, even with him being on the show. A lot of people may also not know these were the characters that inspired the Watchmen. In fact, it might have been the same legal issue why Alan Moore had to change them into different characters to do the Watchmen, but I'm just sort of making that up. Either way, when we signed that master agreement after the Batman and Superman lines to do DC Universe Classics, we had access to finally do these characters. And one of the first things was he was going to be, he being the question, in the Infinite Heroes line. But as a fan of JLU, both the toy line and the show, I knew it was not going to go over well with our diehard fans if he showed up first in Infinite Heroes before we got him into the JLU toy line, because, he had a starring role on the show. And this was definitely one of my first kind of geeky victories, was getting a question figure made. I remember when I first got to hold this, just being like, wow, this is amazing. This figure that was not supposed to be, and we made it happen, and I was so excited to have this figure, and I knew fans were as well. It was absolutely a personal thrill for me to get him into the JLU line, or at least to help. It wasn't all me. Obviously, team worked on this. But I think that the pent-up demand for this JLU figure is what led to him winning the first fan contest. I don't have any proof of this, obviously, but he definitely won overwhelmingly. And when you had other really popular characters like Huntress and Rad Man and Vixen also in the lineup, honestly, I think it was anyone's game. But at the end, the question won. And here is the Horsemen, the color version of their art. I love the way they had a question mark in the smoke and fog. This is actually one of my favorite question pieces of art. So here is the art in full color. As I mentioned, they did 2 versions of Huntress that we could work with Warner Brothers to figure out which would be the best version to make as a toy. But again, they said, make the one the fans want. We support you all the way. And that's what really made them great partners, is they were for pleasing the fans and making the product that was going to make the most people happy. So kind of the more modern, I guess you could call it sexier version, was the one that wound up being part of the fan contest. And she was eventually made. She wasn't in DCU Classics, but she was in DC Signature Series, which was kind of the child of DCU Classics, the Matty Collector version. Catman, another character that did not win the contest, but again, this Horseman art, here's the color version, looks almost exactly like the figure that did get released as part of the Batman 6-inch line. So this, again, wasn't part of DCU Classics, but it was meant to be a compatible line, and Catman out of the package looks exactly like any other DCU Classics figure. Starman, I think this was the only figure in the Fan's Choice that actually did wind up in DCU Classics proper. He was in one of the DC 75th anniversary waves, and yeah, he looks just like his artwork. So that was kind of a preview of what the figure was going to look like with that Horseman art. And gee, what a shocker. The Horseman art looks like the Horseman figure. That's the way it should be, right? Here is Vixen in her classic outfit as she was offered in the Fan's Choice. Now, we never got to Vixen in DCU Classics or Signature Series, But there was a Vixen figure that was released after my time at Mattel in the Multiverse line. There's the Motu Zor bird, once again repurposed. That bird got a lot of use out of that tool. She wasn't in her classic outfit, but at least Vixen did make it into the 6-inch line. And then finally, Rad Man, whom, if won the contest, I'm sure we would have figured out a way to do him, but wow, he was going to be expensive with that deco. It was going to be tough to do him, and I'm kind of glad he didn't win, just because of the cost, but I do wish we found a way to make him happen, because he's the only figure that had no figure. Alright, so I couldn't wrap up this video without giving a huge nod and thank you to ToyFare magazine. We gave them kind of the exclusive rights to announce the contest and announce the winner, and they also did all the tabulation of votes, so that way it would be with a third party and not with Mattel, and man, I miss ToyFare magazine. I still remember getting issue 1 with that AT-AT on the cover with the Hoth scene. So ToyFare magazine was incredible. I mean, it was the internet of its day, and the internet is great, but I miss having toy magazines, and ToyFare was an amazing partner while they were around. If you still have these, they're worth reading, they're worth keeping. I wish I saved more issues. They were awesome.